Is the Finance and Strategic Planning Committee meeting for Monday, November 18th, 2019. Before we get to the agenda, Council recently approved that we would use a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our council meetings as part of, connecting the present and decisions about the future to the very long-standing connections that our Indigenous neighbours have to this place, and to recognize the sharing that we have in that. And so we would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. Like those are things that's important as hosts of meetings and gatherings in this space, that we do acknowledge, and that we can connect the work that we do together to those traditional knowledges, and draw from those experiences and understandings what we can as we make decisions, as we do today and many days, about the future space that we will all have on these lands. I will look now for disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Council, I see two.
Sure, I'm happy to do it now, and later tonight I'll declare on item 9A. It's related to family member ownership of property.
And Councillor Veith?
Same, but item 8 on this evening's agenda is that's where it says that we're to disclose, but anyway, I'm okay with doing it now. So it's the same reasons on the same item 9A.
You're right, I could have done that tonight. I thought the only time we had a disclosure was in the afternoon, but it is in the evening as well. We can do it again if we wish, but thank you for that. I just didn't want to miss it, is all. Yeah, I'm sure we will. But before that, we will approve some minutes from the October 21st Finance and Strategic Planning Committee meeting. Councillor Veith and Councillor Freeman. All those in favour? That's carried. Delegations, we have one at this time. Pedestrian safety at crosswalks. We have Sam Gorman. Sam? Hello, Sam. Come on up.
Hi. Thanks for having me here. My name is Sam Gorman. I'm a grade 8 student at Doon Public School in Kitchener, but I live here in Waterloo. Today I'd like to speak to you about pedestrian collisions and suggest a potential solution. All over Canada, pedestrian and cyclist collisions are increasing. This can be seen right here in the region of Waterloo. This graph is from the 2018 Region of Waterloo Collision Report. It shows the number of collisions in the area from 1996 to 2018. The general trend is traveling upwards, which is not good. Many of these collisions are from a few very problematic areas in the city. According to CTV News, the intersections with the most pedestrian collisions in the region are University Avenue at Albert Street and Herb Street at Herbsville Road and Iron Needles Boulevard. As an example, I would like to use my neighborhood. The main public school in my neighborhood is Lincoln Heights Public School, but there are also many other schools in the neighborhood. This means that there are kids walking to school in every direction, which makes pedestrian safety even more important. There are 3 problem areas in my neighborhood that I would like to point out. First is the intersection of Mayfield Avenue and Lincoln Road. This is one of the biggest intersections in the neighborhood and one of the most commonly used. Most kids walking to school or people walking to the grocery store have to use this intersection. There is a crossing guard here when kids are walking to school, but that doesn't prevent it from being a problem. Next is the intersection of Margaret Avenue and Lincoln Road. This is another commonly used intersection, and the main problem with it is how wide it is. Pedestrians have to cross a much longer crosswalk than normal here. Finally is the intersection of Glenders Drive and University Avenue. Many kids who live on the other side of University have to cross it at this intersection to get to school. University is a very busy road, and many parents don't feel comfortable sending their kids to cross the street alone. Of course, there are other problems in the neighborhood, like the blind corner on Lincoln Road, but they aren't marked on this map. So how can we make these areas safer? When I was in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia over the summer, I noticed these neon orange flags at crosswalks in the city. Pedestrians would take a flag with them across the street to make them more visible to cars, and then put it in the container on the other side. I thought that these flags could be a potential solution to the problems in Waterloo, so I did some research. These flags cost approximately $200 per location. Studies have shown that they improve yielding by 8% and are more effective in the dark and during poor weather conditions. The public response to these flags is mixed, with some disliking how they looked, but mostly positive. Not everyone bothers to use the flags, but those who do are those most at risk, children and seniors. I think that these would be a good addition to the region of Waterloo and can be tested out at a few intersections before implementing them across the region. The intersections with the most pedestrian collisions that I mentioned earlier would be a focus here. A few final notes. Crossing guards are an option at some of these intersections, but they only help protect children walking to school, not other pedestrians. Out of the 3 intersections I mentioned, I feel like the University crossing is the priority, as there is no crossing guard there and it is the most dangerous street to cross. And finally, even though I have mainly been talking about my neighborhood, these types of problems can be found all over the region, and thus the flags can be useful all over as well. I hope that you consider this solution, as I believe it could really make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, Sam. Please stay at the podium. I anticipate you may have questions or comments, and I will look first to your ward councillor, Councillor Vasic.
Thanks, through you, Chair Henry. Thanks, Sam. That was excellent. I don't even know how proud you are, but I'm probably pretty proud. I mean, really, it was a great presentation, and you provided like a broader context, and then you brought it to your local context, and you brought it back to say that this isn't just something that affects me; it's something that affects the whole community. So basically, you're ready to be a city councillor. And that you did your research and you looked to different sources, not just the media, but you looked to the regional sources as well. I mean, this is a really this is A+ work. yeah. And I am curious. I also, just as an FYI, thank you for speaking up on behalf of many residents who have contacted me about these specific locations as well. And the Director of Transportation is here in the audience. And so is hearing all of this and these suggestions, so you couldn't have had a better direct line of access to the staff who are actually putting into place these kind of measures. So thank you for all that. I was curious, have you passed these ideas by anybody at your school, and what are the other kids saying about some of these ideas?
I go to school, I'm in the enrichment program, so I go to school in Kitchener. So at my school, there aren't people talking about my neighborhood. So I don't really know what other kids think of. I know there are a lot of parents who are concerned about these intersections because there's kids walking to school by themselves in the neighborhood.
Are there other questions for Sam from others, Mike? No, for staff. Other questions? So let me say a couple of things before I let council. I let you go and have council ask some questions for staff. The first is I'll echo Councillor Vasic. Excellent job. You were well prepared, and your delivery was fantastic. You look calm, cool, and collected, and that is very appreciated. There are lots of people that come and visit us at the podium and find it very intimidating. I don't know how you're feeling right now, but you did a very good job. The other thing is, particularly in terms of crossing guards, you're suggesting that we could have more. We would agree wholeheartedly that we could have more in the city. Our biggest challenge is recruiting them. So if you or anybody you know are aware of people who would love to volunteer working with kids in their neighborhood or in another neighborhood, a few hours a week, please let us know. Chris is over there in the corner. We are desperate for more crossing guards, and I know Kitchener is too. And that is in fact one of the big limiting factors on how many crossing guards we have, is we simply don't have enough. So if you're aware of folks with that interest, please send them to us or send them to folks around your school down in Kitchener. That would very much help us out. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for coming, and I'll turn to council to ask questions of staff. Councillor Freeman?
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. Yeah, it was a great presentation. Thank you. Christine, sorry, I did have a question for you. This is the first time I've seen these flags. Is this something that is an opportunity for us to explore in the city? Is there anything that prevents people from using these kinds of things through the Ministry of Transportation, or I'd value your thoughts.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman, this is the first time I've seen them as well. So we'd have to do a little bit of research to see whether or not we can do it as part of our Highway Traffic Act. As you know, Ontario's Highway Traffic Act has different abilities compared to other provinces. So I'd need to check that out first to see whether or not we could possibly do it. And if it's at certain locations, the example provided was at a signed, lined crossing. So we'd have to just double check to make sure it's something that we could possibly pilot within Waterloo.
Just a follow-up. Do you need council direction to do that follow-up? I mean, because I'd be happy to move some direction. I think it's interesting to explore the opportunity.
Sure.
Okay, I'll move direction that staff explore the opportunity of using pedestrian crossing flags at selected locations in the city.
Okay, I'll look for you. Board Councillor is seconding that one, Councillor Vasek. Since there's now a motion on the table, rather than questions for staff, are there comments or questions about the motion that is now on the table? Councillor Veith.
Thank you for coming and doing that presentation. It's great, and it's so, to me, like, you know, you go to, as a councillor, you go to conferences and you know to garner this kind of information. But this is so simple, and I've never seen it before. So I think it's worth looking at. So thank you for bringing that to us. It's a great idea.
Through you, Chair. I mean, thanks, Sam, for bringing this idea forward. It's always great to have lots of input on different things. These flags have been tried in a number of different cities and with mixed results, with some people saying that it's helping vulnerable users, others saying that it actually puts the onus on the pedestrian, so drivers don't always, so it's not, it's a little bit contentious. So I would like to maybe have these brought forward as sort of just an interim idea as we look at more robust pedestrian crossing solutions in the city. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't, okay.
Other comments on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. I had other questions for staff from Councillor Bonnegar. Do you still have it? Okay, no, you're good. Councillor Vasek.
Through you, Chair Henry. I am curious if you would speak a little bit to the history of the Mayfield and Lincoln intersection in particular. From what I understand, it might be a bit of a challenging one because it's a four-way stop, and maybe that's not necessarily the ideal. So just to provide people with some context about how, like, the city is aware that maybe that wasn't the best idea, but there was a lot of pressure to do traffic calming there. And so it was a response to say, we know that we want to do something here, and to say to residents that we're taking into consideration your say, but we need to look into something sort of longer term here. So I'm not sure the best way to speak to that, but I think this would be a good time to do that, if that's okay.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Vasek. The intersection of Lincoln and Mayfield has had a crossing guard for over 30 years. At the time of implementation, it was a two-way stop with vehicles stopping only on Mayfield. Please don't quote me. I'll say the decade in which it became an all-way stop was the 90s, because I can't remember the exact year. And at that time, it was an unwarranted all-way stop. I'm not sure. We haven't gone back to check to see if it is still unwarranted. But at this time, we can do additional counts at the intersection to see if something has changed, if the amount of pedestrians have increased. We did make some changes to that intersection, I would say approximately 4 or 5 years ago, where we removed an island that was there. It had a right turn slip off lane, so now it is a proper 4-legged intersection with no confusion for pedestrians. So we have tried to make changes at the intersection in addition to the stop signs.
Would I be able to request a traffic study for there? Yeah, I could follow up with an email if that's okay. Thanks.
So seeing nothing further, I'll just say again, thanks for coming, Sam, and raising some questions and concerns. As you can see, there's some interest and there's some work that needs to be done. I will flag one other key difference in my mind between Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and most places in Ontario. The drivers seem to be a lot nicer in Nova Scotia. I didn't walk in the Dartmouth side. I did walk in the Halifax side and in lots of other places. And I remember my first conference as a city councillor was in Victoria. And while I and then Councillor Whaley were waiting for cars to pass so we could cross the street, the cars had stopped and we hadn't noticed. They didn't have to stop, they just did, and were waiting for us to cross. We were so unused to that as Ontarians. So we can talk about engineering, we can talk about enforcement, we can talk about education. Culture is something that needs a lot of work here, so that we can be as friendly as the people as Dartmouth. When folks are in a hurry getting on the road, they can be a little less in a hurry and recognize that folks like you are trying to get across the street, and just take a little bit more time to be nice. And I think that would go a long way too. I just wish I knew a tool to get there that would work very effectively. So thank you very much for coming in, and we'll continue with the agenda. We have no presentations. Do we have a mover for the consent motion? Councillor Freeman, Mayor Jaworski. I should ask first, is there anything that people want to remove from consent? I know already one item has been. Councillor Bodley? Which item? 5A. If it's just a question, we'll take it. And that's not what the procedure says, but I'll do it. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate your kindness, Councillor Henry. I'm just, with respect to the cost for the Uptown Sidewalk Patio application, the Uptown Sidewalk Patio application fee. I noted in the in the packet that other municipalities were doing this. Is the justification for doing this like a cost recovery piece on our end? Is it because it somewhat seems against the idea that we're just trying to encourage these to happen? So I'm just curious why do we need a fee?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bodley, yes, the idea is the cost recovery fee for the review of the application and the drafting of the encroachment agreement.
Okay, so it remains uncontentious. The consent motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. And that takes us to section 6, staff reports. Just as a note for folks in the room, we're going to move up item 6K, which is the renter control modernization, until after item 6B. I understand our consultants are on a timeline, and I want to make sure we can get to them. So with that noted, we'll go to item 6A, which is Waterloo Award frequency. I understand we've got a different potential direction than what's presented to us. Councillor Veith?
Thank you for indulging me on this. I don't think changing the prestigious Waterloo Award to once every term is the right way to go with this. I think I would rather take it back to the drawing board. I just think that folks don't know enough about it. They don't know enough about the nomination process. And I think people think that you have to be a philanthropist or you have to have a business it's about your employment. And I could probably name off several people in my neighborhood who are well deserving of this award, who, for example, they've run the community breakfast program at their school, plus a million other things they do as volunteers in this community. People who are taking care of community gardens, for instance. And I could name one person in particular in my ward who does this tirelessly. And those people that I believe should qualify for this award or should be nominated for this award. I received this award back in 2003, and certainly if I wouldn't have got it would never have gotten it under what the criteria, whatever that criteria is now, I would never have qualified for it. So actually, Councillor Henry came up with a different recommendation, and I don't know if I can just, Olga has it, and I will read it, and I hope council will support me on this. So number one, that council receive Corp 2019-082, and that council direct staff to pause the Waterloo Award in 2020 and to undertake a review of the frequency, the advertising criteria, selection process of the Waterloo Award, and consult broadly with the community, including past Waterloo Award winners. And number three, that council direct staff to develop a new terms of reference for the Waterloo Award in sufficient time to award it again in 2021. So that's my recommendation. If I could have a seconder for that, that would be great.
Seconded by Councillor Bonagor, and for everybody's benefit, I forwarded the email that was being read off, so you should be able to read that now.
Okay.
Questions, I assume, Councillor Henry?
Just a comment and
Comments
to
as
speak
well?
to it.
Sure.
Thank you, Councillor Veith, for putting the having on for the award this time. I would agree that we really do need to take a bit of a pause back. As Christine knows, we did have some challenges with the committee on just even the criteria and how we were evaluating the applications. So I think looking at how we apply the criteria, how we encourage more people to respond, and also one of the other things that was really important to the members of the committee this year was looking at ways that we can help those that are applying fill out their applications, because there certainly is a difference in how people are filling it out. So I think if all of those things could be part of that, I am planning on supporting the motion. So thank you.
Other comments, Councillor Bonagor, then Councillor Bodley?
Through you, Chair Henry, I also appreciate that you've brought this forward. Councillor Veith, I agree. It's a really important award, and I think once per term limits us. But I would really like to see when should this pass and should we put it on pause to reassess. I would really appreciate seeing a very robust outreach part of our plan so that we are going out to where the people are so that they can find out about the award and make it very clear that it's for anyone doing good in our community. It's leaders of the community certainly are included in that, but so are people who may not perceive themselves to be leaders. I would also like to consider, if possible, having a minimum number of nominees before the award is awarded, and perhaps looking at limiting the number, like maybe one person or a couple or a team per year. These are just some things that I would appreciate you exploring as you put together the plan.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry, I think it's a great addition, Councillor Veith, so I'll be supporting it as well too. I just would like to make a comment that I know that within the neighborhood team, there's been a lot of discussions around volunteer recognition, and I see this as sort of a piece of volunteer recognition as well too. It's just that when you look at some of the members of the community who have won this award, they often, to Councillor Veith's point, look as though they're people who you need to have a significant amount of philanthropic work, and it needs to be part of who you are as a business person or in your career. So I would really appreciate, as part of the review of this, if we're connecting with the neighborhood leaders team and the other people in the neighborhood group to talk about how we can encourage people who have volunteered in our neighborhood associations for decades and who are doing things that Councillor Veith talks about with respect to community gardens and other neighborhood work, to make sure that they understand that they're not only eligible, but we encourage them to apply for this award. So thank you.
Other comments from council? I take it you'd want to wrap, or do you want to speak to the? Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say, back in 2003, apparently it's like when I ran for council, I lost the first time. Like I didn't get the award the first year that I was nominated. That's how grassroots and amazing this award was. Like it was coveted, and it was really exciting to be nominated, right? So anyway, I think that it's time to kind of take it back to that era, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think after 20 years is a good time to take a pause and refresh it and make sure that it's aligned with where the city is now and where we want it to be. I think that makes a lot of sense. And as well as Councillor Veith and I just discussed it over the weekend. I mean, this is staff had recommended it not awarding one in 2020, and in fact awarding again in 2021. Given the scope of engagement that I think is warranted in this process, the pause makes a lot of sense to adopt, so that we can get this right and make sure that we've got the widest pool possible of folks with enthusiasm and interest that will help us completely reflect just what is awesome about what's going on here in Waterloo, and we can recognize that. And all of this, of course, and I'm sure everybody says this is not to say anything about the folks that have won the award in recent years. I think we've had some excellent winners, but we don't know who we don't know because we perhaps have become more constrained over time in who's participating in the process. And there's more out there that we need to know about, and I think that's what this is about today. So with that, I'll look for a vote. All those in favor? That's carried. Next up, we have 6B, that's the Q3 surplus projection. Staff are available for questions if council has any. Are there any questions, council? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to receive it as information. Moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Vasic. I'll simply flag for council there were a number of items in here that you'll note have been referred into the budget process that I'm sure we'll be seeing very shortly, as that is December. And so just if you're turning your mind back to where they came from, this is a good report to flag for some of those. And also in terms of long-term trends, that while we had a spike in terms of departments being in some surplus, that is no longer the case in terms of where we're at in this cycle. Corporate transactions is driving that number, so that's good reflective fodder for next month when we receive the budget and give it some consideration. So with that, all those in favor of receiving the information, that's carried. So now we'll flip ahead to item K, which is that's further than I thought. Okay. The winter control modernization review. So we have our consulting team that's here, but I understand Mr. Rapp is going to do a brief introduction of them before they go ahead. Mr. Rapp, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Henry, members of council. Council may recall last spring or early summer, the province of Ontario introduced a funding opportunity called the Audit and Accountability Fund, where municipalities could engage a private sector consultant to review an aspect of city business or municipal business, looking for any efficiencies or improvements. The City of Waterloo chose to look at winter operations. Subsequently, a request for services went out in July of 2019, this summer, and in August, Deloitte was chosen as the selected consultant to complete the review. Over the last 3 months, leading us to this afternoon, the Deloitte team has been working, conducting research, best practices in the industry, interviewing all levels of staff associated with winter control, really using the Lean Six Sigma as a good method to discover these efficiencies. They are here this afternoon to present their final report and high-level recommendations. The Deloitte team was made up of about a group of 8 to 10 within their organization, spread through Southern Ontario based on their professional experiences. The team was really led by two gentlemen, Matt Colley and Tim Dobby, who are in the audience tonight. And I also see Khalil here as well, which is great. Matt and Tim represent a wealth of experience ranging from about 15 years of public service advisory consulting and as a leader, and to 34 years of municipal experience in the public realm. And that is, of course, with Mr. Dobby. Some of that include being a city manager as well. Also joining me this afternoon, you are aware that Director Christine Kaler is here for transportation, as well as the Director of Environment and Parks, Jeff Silcox-Charles. They are here if there are any specific questions related to operations that the consultant team may not be able to answer. So with that, I'll hand over the presentation to Mr. Colley from Deloitte. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We're pleased to be with you here today. And I'd like to start by, first of all, thanking the city for the opportunity to work with the city staff. I'd like to thank the staff as well for supporting us through this engagement. It was a bit of a tight engagement for us from a time perspective. 3 months can go by really quickly. But the staff were very attentive to all of our requests, which we really appreciated and ultimately helped contribute to our report. So today I'm going to walk through high level in terms of what a report is, and we'll be happy to answer questions once we're done the presentation. So in terms of methodology and carrying out this report, we looked at this engagement in terms of 3 phases. So the first phase was really sort of to understand what the data was that was available at the city. And so we actually worked through about 300 files of operational and financial data and went through and established what we called a baseline, and essentially use that to sort of interpret what was happening from a financial and operational perspective in terms of winter control. The second phase that we then moved into was what we called sort of a targeted analysis of looking at the winter control operations. So essentially what this focused in on was conducting meetings with city staff and workshops as well. So we did 3 workshops with key staff within the city, and we conducted over 20 meetings, basically to understand, make sure that we were interpreting the data correctly, start to test out some of the hypotheses that we were deriving. This was also part of our approach in terms of being collaborative with the city. We did not, want to reach conclusions or jump to conclusions without making sure that we understood the data first of all, and making sure that we understood the city's perspective in terms of what the data was telling us. We then moved into our third phase of the engagement, which was essentially, analyzing and qualifying the findings. So taking those hypotheses and really starting to, create them into concrete findings. And so what that involved was really developing a framework in terms of how we'd assess each of the opportunities. And then, figuring out what the financial benefit could be to the city, what the citizen impact might be, and how easy would it be to implement some of these recommendations that we were coming up with. And then finally, what you see now is our final report, which I believe has been provided and the city has gone through and they've provided a report on, which results in 20 actionable recommendations, which we believe the city can undertake to improve the winter control program. And essentially what this does in terms of these recommendations is it provides a roadmap in terms of what the city can be doing to improve its efficiency and effectiveness of its winter control operations. So just at a high level, when we talk about winter control, it starts with what do we really mean by winter control? And so we looked at basically expenditures that total about $4.26 million that the city spends on winter control. These expenditures are really driven from 5 cost centers. So the first cost center would be transportation, the second cost center was environment and parks, and then the third, fourth, and fifth cost centers were services that were provided to the region, Wilmot and Woolwich as well. If you look at it from an actual type, like what are you actually spending this money on, it's mainly focused in on equipment and then labor. Those are your 2 main cost drivers. And so we were focused in on, what are the costs associated with equipment and the labor costs, and how could you improve the effectiveness and efficiency of those types of expenses. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim to share our next findings.
So we gave the municipality 20 opportunities to make changes to snow control. And the hope was that they would improve the level of service, but also reduce the cost at the same time. The opportunities are grouped to assist Waterloo staff in implementation. Labor management opportunities are what your operations staff in winter control can use as effectively as possible. You obviously have a partnership with CUPE in this municipality, and that will be involved in all of those. Standard operating procedures are part of what your staff are organized, such as plowing techniques, etc. Most municipalities will have some operating procedures that perhaps need to be recorded to reflect what's going on at the present time. Trails, sidewalks, and laneways, of course, are becoming very popular in our municipalities, and you need to use the same kind of innovative approaches to clearing these areas. Staff optimization refers to the accessibility of salt, as well as salt procurement and inventory management. And I should have said at the start of that, salt optimization. Future state vision speaks to the items that will be available in the future. Waterloo is at the center of the technology change in Canada. You may be able to find local partners who can help you to consider what to do in these areas. And on the bottom of that slide, at the bottom of the slide, under the title Opportunity Characterization, we have described the type of information that is available to Waterloo staff. That includes cost savings, service level impacts, cost to implement, risk of implementing, and duration to implement, how long it takes. The next slide is, this slide gives you an idea of, it's called the opportunities listed in areas of those that are less complex or more complex. We think that it is a good idea to start with the less complex. And quick wins are opportunities which provide a positive impact to service levels while being less complex, as they are low risk and have a short time frame to implement. So at the left-hand side of that slide, we list the 9 opportunities that are listed as quick wins. These are a good start for the Waterloo winter control improvements.
Thanks, Tim. And so just to conclude on those quick wins, so that here is a little bit more detail on what those quick wins actually consist of. And so as you can see, basically from this chart here, essentially when we refer to something as quick wins, what we're really talking about is opportunities that are require essentially a relatively low investment in terms of cost. The risk of implementing them are essentially a little bit lower. We believe that they can be implemented quickly, although we do acknowledge obviously that city staff are the individuals that do have to implement, but we have worked with them in terms of characterizing these. But most importantly, we also believe that these opportunities actually have a strong service level impact and yield to low to medium annualized savings that can be realized through the city. So the other thing is that this was Lean Six Sigma. This was a Lean Six Sigma engagement for us. So we were essentially looking at these opportunities from that lens. And so eight of the 9 opportunities that we've listed here as quick wins actually were developed using Lean Six Sigma approaches. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair, and we can go through questions.
Thanks for being able to encapsulate the report in such a short and high-level summary. I mean, you could certainly go very deep on those. Looking to council for questions. Councillor Freeman.
I really appreciate the report. That was great. And my question, either for the consultants or for staff, I was wondering whether or not any of the recommendations we think could also provide some insight to cost reduction and maybe some Lean Six Sigma work associated with leaf collection, recognizing that, you know, the one process kind of leads into the next. And so I just, it's more of considering doing a deep dive into the report, because some of the recommendations in particular that related to things like modification of equipment, in particular plows and so on, like I don't know the answer, but I just wondered what the team thought of that. And by the way, I really hate leaf collection. I'm just putting that out there.
So I did have an opportunity to talk to the staff about leaf collection, and first of all, you are in this with all the other municipalities in this part of Ontario. It is absolutely a totally different job from when it's fall and the weather is actually nice, people are out walking, and your staff know exactly how to pick up those leaves in a fairly organized and quick manner. When it gets wet and when it freezes, all of the things that you're using to remove those leaves in the fall don't work in the wintertime. And I don't think anybody's really come up with the solution, but all I can say is I think the global warming or the change in our environment is going to mean that this municipality and others are going to have to learn how to take up leaves that are frozen. So the process that we followed is similar, and perhaps some of the things, but I did want to say that nobody's figured it out yet. So this particular storm runs from Burlington, where I live, all the way down to Petrolia and Sarnia. And now it's likely that Petrolia and Sarnia will get warmer weather, and so they'll be okay. But so you could go through the process that Deloitte has done with the city to try and make improvements to that. But it is it's not easy, and it's here to stay, I think.
Chris, do you have anything in addition to that you'd like to add?
I guess I could add that if we knew when the leaves were going to fall, we'd probably be able to pick them up earlier. It's not an easy situation. I would love to be able to have the leaves fall before the snow comes, but this is Canada, so we learn to adapt. So right now we're using our loaders and our trucks that would normally be clearing the snow. So there's not a lot of options from a municipality point of view that I've heard from other municipalities. We're all in the same leaf collection boat together. The only thing is some municipalities have decided not to provide the service, and they've encouraged their residents to mulch, compost, and do that on their own properties rather than having us pick them up at the curb.
And I know the Forest City down the highway in London made that choice about 10 years ago. And I'd also know the consultants are constrained by the terms of the province's mandated contract that service level reductions are not an option for them to be speaking about as part of the terms of their engagement. Even if that was their best recommendation, they could not tell us to reduce service one iota, or the minister would be very upset with very angry letters from his staff. Other questions for the consultants, perhaps about winter control modernization, as fun as diverting to the leaves underneath the snowbanks are? Councillor Bodley?
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. Some of these might be joint between the consultant and staff. So I had a few questions, a few comments on some of the opportunities. So one of the opportunities was around third-party consultants and increasing that for parking lots and certain streetscapes, et cetera. And in the report, it identified the risk to that as relatively low. And I would just point out that I know the region of Waterloo is having some challenges with their snow clearance around bus stops, which is a third-party consultant issue that they're dealing with. So I think the risk is maybe a little higher than we're highlighting there. So I would just make that comment depending upon where exactly we are looking at potentially looking at third-party consultants. That was merely a comment. Second question was around communication to council. And I guess, and especially noting that this was highlighted as a quick win, I don't know, maybe I'm just new to council. I felt like communication to council was pretty good around what was happening with respect to snow clearance. So I'm wondering if maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that, and and I'm curious in particular whether there was any discussion around, I know we have a very robust GPS system that highlights where our plows have been, and perhaps it's a bit too complicated in its current form to share with the public, but whether there was any thought process around having some sort of a system like that that could be shared with the public, which would maybe eliminate the necessity for it to even communication to even come to council.
I'll start, maybe if that's okay with staff. And so, in terms of communication with council, I think the thing that we found was that there wasn't really a standard protocol in terms of when there is, when there is a storm going on. And as councillors, we certainly understand that residents are going to be calling councillors to say, hey, when is my street going to get plowed? And it can, as councillors, I think you would see a lot of pressure, and so. From our perspective, when we were looking at the operational side of things, it is very, when you're going through a methodical way in terms of plowing your city and your streets, it's very costly to redirect your operation of a standard protocol in terms of how staff should be communicating with councillors so that councillors can update the public appropriately. And I do think certainly when there are issues where a street does get missed, I mean we obviously, I think the city doesn't mean to do that, but when it does happen, there has to be a plan in place in terms of how that will get addressed. And so things like that need to be in the communication protocol, so that there isn't a redirection of equipment to certain areas of the city that are going to cause problems elsewhere in the cities. Because once you kind of deviate from your plan, it causes usually a bit of a problem. In terms of GPS, and certainly that technology is out there. In terms of the benefits, in terms of being able to see where a particular plow is. At a certain point in time, we think there's mixed results right now in terms of when you're watching sort of the plows go by and they miss your street, you may not realize that they're plowing a more high traffic road, right? And so those roads usually have to be done first before you can get into residential areas, right? And so from that perspective, I think before you jump into that technology, you have to sort of get used to and making sure that you have the right sort of protocols in place in terms of making sure that people understand the process. Because I think what will happen is if someone sees the plow go down their street, one street, and their residential road wasn't plowed, they'll be like, "Come on, you're being inefficient. The plow was right there. It could have plowed my street." When in reality, that wasn't sort of the purpose of that plow. So I'll turn that over to staff though to comment as well, because we did have conversations about that as well.
So for the communication piece, we are working on a standard piece that we will insert the same amount of information in on a regular basis so that it looks the same every time that we have a large snow. You will be able to give the information back to the public in the same manner. So we are working on that and hope to have that. Well, I hope to have it before the snow started, but that didn't really work. So we hope to have that in the next few weeks. As well, we're making some changes to our website, similar to what we've done with leaf collection. We are showing what a priority one road is. So those streets will all be identified on the website so that the residents can go in and check and see and find out exactly what their street is and when possibly we would get there. So for example, Class 4 street, when we need to be there in so many hours, you would know that we will be there within X amount of hours as far as how much snow is being accumulated on the ground.
Great, thank you. Happy to hear that it was discussed, and yeah, perhaps it's not time for it to be utilized yet, and I understand that there's all sorts of other situations where you could see a plow coming down the road and then the plow doesn't plow your street because there were cars parked on the street, and the residents may be curious as to why. But I would hope that in the future, long term, that's something that's on the agenda, because I think as a counselor I'd be able to answer that question without having to go through staff to find out when exactly the plow was on there, if it was information that was available to me or to the resident. But I'll move on to my next question. My next question was around the slip and fall data. My question on that, with respect to that, is how do we collect that data? And is there any risk of that data being underreported? Somebody slips and falls, breaks a wrist, but doesn't tell us or doesn't get that information in our hands?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say maybe just in terms of the risk of it being underreported, there is a risk of it being underreported because you only know about it once someone actually reports it to you. So it is dependent on the actual input. In terms of how that data is collected, I'm not sure if staff have an answer to that.
The information that we receive from our insurance pool tells us when we've had incidents such as slips and falls, but it's only as good as the information that's given to them. So at this time, I don't really have any more to offer than that.
And I would just highlight then that I think that I don't know where the risk was on that one, but I would in the actual report, but I would think that we would want to monitor that. Medium? Oh, perfect. So I'd just highlight that we would want to monitor that as we move forward if we're going to sort of be prioritizing areas based on that. And then the last one that I had was around the route priority system, which I think is a really great idea, and for sidewalks and trails, excuse me. And I'm curious if there was any discussion around efficiencies on maybe not publicly owned sidewalks, if it's a priority route. Was there any discussion that went on around, we have priority 1, 2, 3, and 4 roads? Would we ever have priority 1 sidewalks that are maintained whether or not they're city owned?
Coming forward right now is looking at prioritizing what we currently maintain. So we are placing priority 1, 2, 3, that kind of idea, but only on those sidewalks and or trails that are currently in our inventory to maintain.
Was there any discussion around expanding that at all?
No.
Yeah, at this point, no. We could take that direction forward.
Okay, so I'll look for other questions from council for our consultants and staff team, and I'll simply note, Councillor Baddeley, on the prioritization of what we already maintain. That was something I remember raising in our transportation master plan workshop. So I mean, good to hear it coming from lots of different places. It's always nice to know when you're not off track. Yeah, Councillor Barnacle.
Through you, Chair Henry, I just have a comment. I'd like to thank staff for being so quick on seeing this opportunity, seizing this opportunity, and for the consultants for delivering some ideas that we can hopefully start implementing quickly. So I just want to thank you all for the work involved, and I look forward to seeing this start to get rolled out.
Seeing nothing further, I'll say this: I appreciate the work that's being done, and I know staff will keep looking at the prioritization exercise that we've been provided and fitting it within work plans and the rest. I'd flag that we know we'll have business plan presentations in January from various divisions. I'm sure council will be interested in hearing how these integrate inside transportation to know what might be moving forward. It's always good to connect the dots all the way through, recognizing that leads. This comes sometimes with investment, and investment means budget, and budget means the thing we'll be doing for the next few months. So it's good to connect A and B through all of this. And the other thing I'll flag, and the consultants can tell me if I'm off base, a lot of the quick wins and other items here have relatively low cost savings. They have some range on them, and that's why the range is so large, I think, on the estimate that comes through. But the biggest impact from them is on service level. So even if you save $20,000 or $30,000 on doing something, which is relatively negligible in the broader transportation budget, it could be a huge service impact for how residents are feeling and experiencing the service, and that's where there's some value. And the large saving items that I saw were all tied to longer term initiatives. So the big numbers come in the 2 years plus category, and I think it'll be interesting for me to see where those land in a 3-year budget process, and whether we're able to start activating them within this window of council, or whether then we get to the next window of council. I think that'll be helpful to know. I see Councillor Vasek having some questions that might necessitate her using a microphone. Do you have things to say?
Yes. Well, just for a point of clarification, is that if this is our conversation about this, we're not having further discussion after the motion is put forward. This is, anyways. To Councillor Bodley's question, that's what I'm curious about, is exploring some other, even just conversations about prioritizing non-public or non-arterial sidewalk snow removal. And so I'd be curious if that would be possible to have conversations as you're looking at the sort of reconfiguration of plow zones to more equitably distribute lane kilometers. I mean, some communities have looked at, or so a gendered lens to sidewalk snow removal. So looking at removing snow on areas where typically women, but people who care for others, have to go first thing in the morning. So routes to schools, routes to daycares, maybe to hospitals, because nurses, who tend to be more often women in those roles, have to be at 7 a.m. for a shift change. So just curious if that can be part of the conversation, because it's a huge community interest in sidewalk snow removal and what that might cost and what it might look like, and actually just to probably do it to make the city more accessible for people. So I'm curious if that can be added to the additional initiative conversation.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Vasek. The short answer, yes, definitely can be added. If I can add to that, through the process of prioritizing what we would consider priority locations, naturally those private pieces in between those areas are likely to be priority as well. So I don't see it as a huge undertaking to identify those locations by any means at all. And you're right, they would be those locations with high volume, with schools, with those types of areas. So it's naturally going to happen. The larger challenge will be to identifying that cost, that added cost to that service level increase, and then coming back and presenting that to council.
So before we engage on that thought more, there was one other thing I noted in the report outside of the consultant's recommendations, and that was the things that staff were thinking as well that were not consultant recommendations but were staff recommendations, and one of them was around talking to the region. I wonder, Chris, if you wanted to speak to that, Chris or Jeff, if you wanted to speak to that briefly, knowing that we've got a regional road maintenance agreement under review over the next year.
Sure, through you, Chair Henry, to you. I'll speak to that, as I don't think Chris is going to that meeting on the 13th. So we had planned, there is a meeting on the 13th coming up. We're engaging with the region, and I know from my perspective, one of the things I'm taking forward is those GRT stops. So what often happens is there's so many different people involved in winter operations. Many different bodies involved, and where things tend to go awry are at the edges. Where someone's contract ends and where another one starts, where we're doing a sidewalk and Roads is doing the road. So one of the things that we're bringing forward is, can we look at those bus stop locations? I think it drives all of us crazy when a bus stop is clear, the sidewalk is clear, and there's a 3-foot mound in between the two. So it's common sense in a lot of ways, but it's just starting that dialogue, getting that conversation going. If it's within your ability to do that work, why not do that work? If it's not within your ability to do that work, flag it for your supervisor. Somebody can do that work. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I thought I said something along arterial roads in terms of clearing too. Was I wrong on that? Yeah. Mr. Rapp.
Through Chair Henry. In the last 2 years in my meetings ongoing with the commissioner at the region and other staff in similar positions that I am across the other 2 cities, the region has not said no as fervently about the concept of maintaining sidewalks on regional roads. There's more of an open mind to start thinking along those lines. So I think it's good that we would continue with the discussion, and perhaps it could unfold into our agreement that each of us have with the region. It's not there yet, but there's more of an open mind than there has been in the last decade or 20 years for certain.
I think that's particularly helpful on a resourcing standpoint, knowing that many of those regional roads are backlotted and therefore fall within our responsibility, since they can be nobody else's responsibility. Most of our lane kilometers are things only we can do. And so if there's funding for some of those, that provides extra resources to do more without increasing the strain under our own budget. I think that would be the easiest is a difficult word, but the most straightforward way to allocate additional resources to support the effort that Mr. Silcox-Giles was talking about. You can prioritize, but then doing is the hard part in terms of funding those aspects. So I'll look at this point for motion on the recommendations that are before us. Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Bonagora. Any further discussion here? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you very much, folks, for coming in. Safe travels on the roadways. Next up, we'll go back up to item C, asset management update. We have both the public engagement update as well as the report cards in fleet and in parking, and Cass has a presentation for us. Go ahead when you are ready.
Sorry, I'm really short. Mayor, Chair Henry, members of council, members of the audience, thank you for having me here today. The intent of this presentation is to provide an overview of the 3 asset management reports before council today: the fleet and parking report cards, public engagement, and a general overview of asset management updates. So the first one is the fleet and parking report cards. They look very similar to the ones that you've seen before, so for example like transportation or water distribution, and there's 2 key areas to identify, and that's the maturity of the asset information as well as the funding. So the asset maturity is related to the availability and quality of the data, and both fleet and parking have a high level of maturity. The second is the funding, which is representative of the rehabilitation replacement funding provided by both the fleet reserve and the parking reserve. Funding from development charges or the capital reserve fund are excluded as they fund growth projects or studies. So a little bit about these 2 asset classes. Fleet has an estimated replacement value of $18 million, and it is anticipated that the average annual funding of $2.2 million will result in the assets improving to a fair performance level over the next 25 years. Parking has an estimated replacement value of $34 million and is anticipated with the annual funding of $250,000 will result in performance increasing to a good performance level over the next 25 years. The public engagement campaign that was undertaken in 2019 was a second engagement campaign that we've done for asset management. This particular engagement campaign was designed to inform and consult the community on asset levels of service to help prioritize the city's limited infrastructure funding. The engagement campaign focused on the city's four most extensive and costly infrastructure assets: city-owned facilities, stormwater infrastructure, parks and trails, and transportation. The approach taken this year was three-pronged and included staff from asset management attending public information centers for various projects throughout the city, posting surveys on Engage Waterloo for all four asset classes, and targeted outreach to neighborhood associations, committees of council, and student associations for all three post-secondary institutions. Through this approach, this year's engagement reached over 1,300 participants, although this doesn't include the people that we talked to at the public engagement sessions. This particular approach resulted in an increase in engagement by over 250% compared to the 2018 campaign. So the next few slides will talk about the three key findings from this engagement. The first key finding is that the overall satisfaction with the current performance of our city assets is high, although the high and lows are kind of smoothed. For example, 44% of park survey respondents believe that park assets are in good or very good condition, while 75% of stormwater respondents believe that those assets are in good or very good condition. It's really important to recognize that survey respondents interact with the various types of city infrastructure differently. The differences are primarily how they look, touch, and feel the assets. It's really easy for people to understand how a road feels when they drive on or they see it, but it's really hard to understand how a sanitary pipe under the ground or an HVAC system behind the wall works. The second key finding was that the respondents believe that green infrastructure investment is important to them. So examples of some green infrastructure include geothermal HVAC systems or natural playgrounds. The third key finding is that increasing investments in current infrastructure is important to survey respondents. On December 9th, the proposed 2020 to 2022 budget will be released to both council and the public and will include measured increases to infrastructure spending. Approval of those proposed increases will be considered by council on February 10th. In March, council approved CAO 2019, which summarized the city's asset management journey to date. At that time, council requested staff to investigate the capacity for additional rehabilitation funding on three different fronts: the construction industry, staff, and the community. In regards to the construction industry, staff have received feedback from the Conestoga Heavy Construction Association and the Grand Valley Construction Association that there is capacity to deliver more projects, although have advised that adjustments to the procurement process will help. Specific examples provided to staff include providing additional time to respond to requests for tenders and to allow flexible start dates and schedules. So an example of that was the wording that was included within the Marsland Drive reconstruction tender a few years ago. For staff capacity related to infrastructure funding, engineering services, facility design and management, and environment park services are the primary divisions that deliver capital rehabilitation projects. All three provided their feedback regarding staff capacity in the event that additional infrastructure funding is provided. For engineering and facility and design and management, there is capacity depending on the amount of the funding increase and depending on where the project's funding is allocated to. Additional funding for road resurfacing is easier to accommodate than a large-scale project similar to Silver Lake. Environment and Parks provided feedback that they may require additional resources, such as contract staff or third-party project management. Another piece of the puzzle is the community's capacity for construction. An area of focus is using effective communication to coordinate rehabilitation projects with our neighboring municipalities to effectively allocate our collective resources when considering the impact to the surrounding community. Staff will continue to consider opportunities to reduce the disruption, especially as the capital program increases. The third report before council is the asset management update, which provides an overall update on four main areas for asset management. The first is resourcing. In order for asset management information to be maintained for decision making, a critical component is staff resourcing, as this section continually analyzes, updates and maintains data, maintains the asset management policy and system, and updates the asset management plan to meet the requirements outlined by Ontario Regulation 588-17. As a result of the 2016 Asset Management Plan, the Asset Management section is currently comprised of 4 staff positions. 2 of the positions are contract and have been included within the proposed 2020 to 2022 budget for consideration to become permanent positions. In addition to the resources for the asset management section, the 2016 Asset Management Plan and the 2018 Long-Term Financial Plan both recognize that an increase in staff resources will be required as staff reinvestment funding increases. These resources are intended to assist with the implementation of additional capital reinvestment activities and may include, however not limited to, project management, procurement, asset management, information technology, and finance. The exact needs will be refined by management throughout each budget process and tabled at that time for Council's consideration. Ontario Regulation 588-17 was enacted in December 2017 and identifies significant requirements for the application of asset management principles to ensure municipalities make informed infrastructure decisions. The regulation has been phased in over a 5-year timeframe as outlined on the screen. Through Council's approval of the Strategic Asset Management Policy in March, the City has met the first requirement. The creation of a long-term financial plan was one of the recommendations from the 2016 Asset Management Plan and something that Finance had wanted to do, as they are both tools for Council and staff to consider scenarios for the future, to help strategic planning process, and to help the City navigate challenges. The City's first long-term financial plan was approved by Council in April of 2019 and will be tabled before Council on December 9th as part of the proposed 2020 to 2022 budget release. And the last item is data improvements. The asset management section has been working on numerous data improvements such as realigning asset ownership between asset classes, creating processes to update information in a systematic and repeatable methodology from source systems, the development of a cross-asset tool to help the capital prioritization process, and the creation of the report cards. These data updates have resulted in staff confirming that the infrastructure value for the City of Waterloo is currently at $2.3 billion and that the annual infrastructure gap is $20 to $23 million. Tax-based assets are estimated to have an annual gap of $17 million, while enterprise assets such as water and parking have an estimated gap of $3 to $6 million annually. Now, Council has seen this type of graph before. However, we have made an improvement to it due to feedback to the City of Waterloo's liaison to the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee. The feedback we received was that the contrast between the orange, which was the original color for the poor quality, and the red wasn't significant enough for individuals with visual impairments. As a result, the color orange has been changed to blue, and the future graphs will be represented in these colors. In regards to this specific graph, based on the current available information from the decision support system as well as the funding from the approved 2019 capital budget and 2020 to 2028 capital forecast, is estimated that just over 30% of tax-based assets are in poor or very poor condition, and that is anticipated to increase to about 75% in the next 25 years. This is a similar graph, however, it's for our enterprise areas, so water, sanitary, stormwater, parking, and okay. Based on that information, our enterprise assets have just under 20% of their assets in poor or very poor condition, and they're anticipated to go to about 40% very poor or poor condition in the next 25 years. And I am excited to say that the City of Waterloo is an active member in the asset management community, and that the work we've undertaken here at the City has resulted in the City winning 3 awards in the last 3 years. So what's next? Asset management staff will share the engagement results with the applicable departments and divisions, that the proposed 2020 to 2022 budget does include some measured increases for reinvestment funding for consideration in February, and that asset management will continue to improve data and processes such as continuing to pull data from source systems, and the development of community and technical levels of service for non-core assets in order to meet the Ontario regulation that we have before us. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer your questions, and I actually made it under 10 minutes.
There's a lot of information to do in 10 minutes, and I'm glad you combined 2 reports since there are a lot here. And it's also good to know that based on feedback, the information that we have is going to be as accessible as possible. I mean, we already knew that orange was the new black, but blue is the new orange. And I think that's the follow-up for that. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Bodley.
I don't want to be the one continuing to ask questions, but I'm curious about the sort of perception versus reality piece on the public engagement. So, when I respect what you said around the idea that residents are more aware of the types of assets that they interact with as opposed to stormwater, et cetera. But the perception from residents seems to be that our assets are in good or very good position at a higher rate than they actually are. And I'm wondering whether this colors our conversation around level of service going forward as we look at assets moving from the good to the fair category, or if the engagement is just not broad enough for you to make that assertion.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bodley. I don't know that I would say it that is going to color the results of the engagement will color what we do in the future going forward. I think that there's a lot of detail in there that will tell us what assets are important to the community. The overall arching view, they might have been thinking about one park or one building or one road. So it's hard to know about that. It's really difficult to get into the granular details with the public. But I think the information they gave us on their priorities with respect to the playgrounds versus the benches versus the lighting will help the subject matter experts make the appropriate decisions to bring forward to council for approval.
What's helpful about the public engagement piece is when presented with that information and able to engage with staff on it, they understand the problem. They see it as a priority to significant degrees with minor variation depending on the category. And in a measured way, they recognize the need for us to do more. And council will have the opportunity to figure out what that will look like through the budget cycle. Ms. Patel?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bodley. In addition to what Ms. Pacey just mentioned, we are using the actual asset condition index information when developing the capital budget. So no matter what the public perception is with respect to how good the asset is, we're looking at the real data and seeing that these are the areas that need more attention, and appropriately the funding has been determined when we were doing the capital budget. So we are understanding what the community's priorities are, but when it comes to knowing where to invest in terms of the condition, we're relying on the asset management data.
It's easier to hear the creaks and bumps in your own HVAC unit than the ones in our facilities. Councillor Freeman?
This is a bit of a combining two reports question, but how is the asset management data used when the development charge study is undertaken?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman. So the development charge study is primarily based on growth projects. So when we say that we're going to upgrade a particular pipe, so for example we decide we're going to widen a road or we're going to upgrade a pipe, that information is used to the DC bylaw, but until the pipe is actually upgraded, it doesn't play into the asset management system, because we kind of include it as a like for like sort of thing. So if a pipe is going to be 200 mils in diameter versus 200, if it's recommended to go to 300, when it becomes 300 is when we'll incorporate it.
I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is that the asset management plan knows more broadly, like it's a decision-making tool for where it is that we're going to undertake rehabilitation. Some of that rehabilitation will effectively unlock, for lack of a better way to say it, more development opportunity than others. So when we use it as a tool to make decisions in terms of what's coming down in our capital plan and feeding into our asset or into our development charges, I think we have an opportunity, right, to make some very strategic decisions related to where do we make the investment so that we get the most amount of, I'm going to say, tax assessment uplift or whatever. And I really appreciated that these two reports actually came the same day. And so, I have this same question later when we talk about the DCs, and it might be that we don't have the answer right now. I see some staff nodding because I forced this conversation to happen about 10 years ago as well. And in that particular case, I'm looking at Sunda, I think we fronted about 5.2 million out of our DCs, which unlocked 75% of developable opportunity within a certain area in the city. I know that we have challenges with regard to infrastructure in the uptown, which limits and restricts some of the development opportunity. And I just want to make sure that we get the DCs right, and that that we've considered that in light of our asset management strategy. So it may not be an answer for tonight. As I said, I will raise it during the formal meeting on the development charges, but I'm trying to help link how this all comes together. I see a few heads nodding, so.
I'd like to go to staff in the interest of time in the afternoon. Mr. Rapp?
Certainly, through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman. The key word that you just mentioned was a link, and that is none of these stand alone on their own. And staff, even with a very complicated decision-making model and system, will not only rely on that decision-making model. We will be using master plans, which feed into which come from really our growth scenarios based on draft plans of subdivision, district plans, intensification, our nodes and corridors model. That then will feed into the development charge bylaw, and then we go through that proportion of existing users versus growth, and then that information will also tie in with our asset management plan. Ultimately, the model spitting out what the historical nature is and what the predicted nature is, weaved in with where we think there will be growth. And so engineering works closely with finance and the asset management group to determine the capital budget, but it's all those things working together. So link is the key word that you mentioned.
Is this a development charge conversation that can happen in the evening? Okay, go ahead.
But it's in that light that I really feels very strongly that the asset management work needs to stay within the engineering department, because we can't be making decisions just based on the number associated with the physical wellness or whatever of the product, of the item. That the ground truthing that we have from the community that you got through the engagement survey is critically important information, and I appreciate the fact that you're starting to drill down on that. But it will be the technical assessment of what people are saying that is going to make this system robust. And if we think of this only as numbers and not people, we are going to be making very poor choices. And I am not okay with any of that. I feel very, very strongly that this whole work needs to stay within our engineering department, and I just want to put that out there. And then the other piece is about how we're going to be tracking comments. Like, I liked how you showed the engagement survey and you spoke about the differences between the two, and I'm just hoping that somehow or another we come up with some kind of template so that we can demonstrate how that community engagement data has been used to inform decision making and how it's changed over time, I guess.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman, I can definitely take a stab at creating a template to track that.
Certainly continual loops of information and feedback is helpful as we go through projects, and one of the benefits of the engagement process this was, rather than try to get people to engage on the plan as a whole, go to where they're at on specific projects, and you can have much more robust conversations. Even if they can tell you less about the system as a whole, they can tell you a lot more than we were getting trying to go at a high level. I'll look for someone to move the recommendations of receiving the information. Councillor Freeman, Councillor Bodley. Were there any other questions on this? Sorry, I jumped over that. All those in favor? That's carried. Next, we have the Uptown Public Realm Strategy Implementation. Mr. Griffin.
Good afternoon. Councillor Henry, Chair Henry, members of council, thanks for having me this afternoon. Here to report the council report IPPW 2019-054, Public Realm Strategy Implementation. The council approved Public Realm Strategy, which we refer to as the UPRS, back in March 2019. The strategy is sort of a roadmap for staff to guide public realm improvements over time. The purpose of this report tonight is to release the 2019 capital funding and give council sort of a look at the 2020 to 2022 implementation framework in Appendix B of the report. As I mentioned, March 4th, 2019, council approved the public realm strategy. Guide public realm improvements in Uptown over time. The strategy proposes 5 urban system concepts. There's breathe, parks and open space, move, connectivity, frame, urban form, celebrate heritage, and inspire public art and culture. 3 sort of main strategic priorities that came out of that report were the Laurel Greenway, which is a continuous urban greenway along the Laurel Trail and Laurel Creek that connects the public square, LRT station, and other uptown destinations. Sort of runs from the pedestrian bridges in Waterloo Park down through connecting up to Bridgeport Road. The Civic Common, which is an expansion of the original town square to create a new front lawn for City Hall, which is just behind us, and integrates 2 existing parks and the regional pumping station. And Willis Way, which is envisioned as a shared street for all modes of transportation, and creates a continuous path from Barrel Warehouse Park to Cenotaph Park. Just touch on some early successes staff have had over the past year or so. The Active Transportation Group is working on some trail improvements at Regina Street and the Spurline Crossing. The region has implemented a crossing improvement at Bridgeport Road and Laurel Trail. And our Heritage Group is looking at the Uptown Cultural District at Urban Caroline and performing some analysis of heritage attributes and enhancing the landscape around that intersection. Economic Development did their Open Streets Festival, I believe, in 2 dates this year, and used the slope of Willis Way for a picnic space that contains some sod, temporary sod. Some parkade murals were commissioned this year that are on the south side of the parkade. Look great. And some analysis of designation bylaws and heritage commemoration and education options for the Seagam lands. For Civic Common, the William Street Pumping Station, review of designation bylaw and joint implementation of relevant Uptown Public Realm Strategy actions occurred. We'll just get into our 2019 implementation. I recognize we're in November. We don't have a whole lot of time left in 2019, but there is still work we can do. We're recommending to start a feasibility study on the Laurel Greenway, which will be a consulting agreement. That feasibility study will focus largely on intersection improvements and GRCA requirements in the hydraulic floodway. It'll also include some discussion, some alternatives around a shade structure in the public square. Number 2, for Willis Way, we're going to proceed with some minor improvements along the north side of the street. Focus on some more immediate needs, some sidewalk replacement, bike rack replacement, some tree grates on that street need to be replaced, and some of the trees have died. I'd like to replace those. There's sort of a three stages of Willis Way I'll get into a little bit after the presentation. For the Civic Common, we're going to start initiating discussions with the landowner, which is the region of Waterloo, for that pumping station, and determine next steps. I haven't had a chance to sit down with them since the public realm strategy was approved, so I'd like to do that before we recommend next steps. And then getting into 2020, the next 3-year capital budget, we can probably complete that feasibility study for Laurel Greenway and come back to council either late summer or early fall of 2020. and start to look at what the recommendations were, look at the alternatives for the shade structure, hear discussion from the region of Waterloo on several different intersections and GRCA, and then make a determination from there if the project is feasible to proceed to detailed design. For Willis Way, we'd like to try to construct those immediate needs in 2020. I'd like to start that work in the spring of 2020 if possible. Work with businesses on the timing and the impacts, and make sure they're comfortable with timing. There's things we can do in the construction contract to make sure we're sort of outside their business operations framework. And then when we come back to council in 2020, I'll include the outcome of those discussions for the Civic Common as well. Part of the 2020 implementation, we'd like to explore costs of building a new electronic 3D model for Uptown. I'll touch on why in a little bit. And I'd also like to work with Environment and Park staff to identify some new test sites for new planting strategies over time, so we can start to bring those ideas into Uptown, so our planting areas can look good all the time while we're minimizing operations and maintenance. Kind of go back to some of the benefits of creating an electronic 3D model. It helps us visualize all the 5 urban systems together. Will help us contemplate how and where some of these major program elements are proposed to go, such as buried hydro, streetscape improvements, parks, street infrastructure, trail planning, kind of in the safety of a design process. Technology's come a long way in the 3-dimensional modeling, and you can see some of the examples there below. We can get pretty detailed on certain alternatives, or stay kind of high level and just look at how and where we can incorporate some of these program elements. So it's a good decision-making tool. And we'll assess the costs of undertaking that model through an RFP process. And I just included sort of a map of Laurel Greenway, which runs from Waterloo Park pedestrian bridges all the way through Urban Caroline, in behind Value Mart, through King Street, over to Regina, behind City Hall, and all the way up through Herb and Bridgeport Road. I'll keep that map up for any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, John, for the detailed questions from Council. Councillor Bonagora.
Through you, Chair Henry, thanks for the update. I'm very excited about the public realm strategy, as I know lots of people in my ward and across the city are.
Good.
I've got a few questions for you, though,
Sure.
just about what's being put forward and largely around the timelines. I was just hoping, could you explain why staff is recommending that we wait to enact bigger changes on Willis Way? I mean, I suspect a fair number of people were hoping to see something more immediate.
Okay. Yep, through Chair Henry to Councillor Bonagor. There's 2 things with Willis Way. First of all, the first thing I look at is the life cycle of the road. The city wouldn't rebuild Willis Way probably for another 20 years in another new permanent condition. Just talking about the theme of asset management. So I think there's just building on the discussion we were having this afternoon, I think there's sort of a mid-range project here, possibly, where we can look at advancing some more temporary closures on the street, possibly even some additional special events, things like that. Because right now when we close it for open streets, I think we kind of close it for the weekend and then that's it. So we can certainly explore. I just want to flesh out the idea a little bit more. I'd like to explore maybe increasing that time frame for a week or 2. And I think we were talking about sort of a 3-month period this afternoon. I'd rather come back to kind of a shorter time frame initially and warm businesses up to that idea, and give them a stake in the project as well, so they're helping with that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. The more immediate needs we can do anyway in advance, like we can build those improvements in 2020, we'll proceed with those, but let's flesh out that sort of mid-range project and look at what it actually is, what the boundaries are, and we may have to do some traffic analysis to see if it is a 1 week or 2 week closure, what that would look like and things like that. Public consultation would be an important component of that as well.
Thank you for clarifying, and yeah, I really encourage you to keep pushing on doing short-term wins with some exploration of how we can introduce the idea of what the street could become longer term. If you could also just make sure that access to those accessible parking spots are always factored into what we're doing as well, that would be great.
For sure, yep. Look at that as part of the Laurel Greenway feasibility study, for sure. Yep.
Great.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the pilot of planting options, which I think is very exciting, looking at, drought tolerant no-mow planting, low-growing perennials. Now, is the idea that this would serve as a pilot just for the core, or is this something that could be done in other places across the city as well?
Yep, through Chair Henry to Councillor Bonagor. The vision was just to test some different materials in various areas of the city. I've got a few areas in mind, but looking at some existing city parks, some existing challenging areas where is a maintenance headache today. There's some areas in Waterloo Park potentially we could look at, but no, certainly the test sites can be in 4 or 5 different locations around the city. But the idea is to try to figure out a way to make them look good with minimal operations and maintenance, and then bring that idea into the uptown as part of any implementation. They could certainly be implemented elsewhere in the city over time in partnership with environment and parks, but or capital projects. But that was kind of my thinking, just to test them out, see if they're working, make changes, which ones are working, which ones aren't, and then bring those ideas into the town square.
That's great. And I've just got one last question. So with the idea of the 3D model, should it work out and should it be possible to bring that forward within reasonable cost, is this the kind of thing that would be internal, or could it be available to the public in some minimized guise so that they could see how the city looks in built form, but also projects that have been approved but haven't been built yet, how they would affect the city as well?
Yeah, through Chair Henry to Councillor Bonagor, I think I don't see an issue making it public. Almost our entire GIS system is public. So something like this certainly is part of public engagements. We would make it public temporarily and then maybe take it off, but today I don't see an issue making it public, just to show people what we're thinking, some of the alternatives we're looking at, or just even the existing conditions. So I'll get back to you in 2020, but I don't see an issue with that. Yeah, thank you.
And John, as you go to RFP on that particular one, I hope that you speak with planning a little bit, because if we do develop a model, I would hope and expect that through planning applications that we would require people to submit proposals through it, so that can also be part of that. Other cities have done that. Councillor Freeman?
That's you, Chair Henry. I also had questions on the pilot work. I was just hoping that if we do something like that we can really think a little bit about signage too, because I think there's value in helping people to think a lot differently about what those spaces look like, so that all of us will get less emails related to, I'll say the Davenport Road Center median islands.
Okay.
That tends to be the ones that I get in my ward, and I know that we're starting to think a little differently in terms of building pollinator gardens and so on, and I think we need to help people understand what those look like, because to many eyes they look less attractive than a mowed space, but to other eyes they look really inventive and nice. And I know Councillor Beath really likes dandelions, and so to her eyes dandelions are beautiful yellow flowers.
I agree.
and make healthy salad bases, I think, which people don't appreciate nearly enough. Any other questions for John on this item? If not, I'll look for perhaps Councillor Bonagor to move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That's carried.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to see what I can do to expedite where we're going. Council, are there any questions on items F or G? Please look at your agendas. Are there questions? Yes, I will skip items F and G. Item H. We will defer items F and G until later, since there are questions. Item H is a public delegation, and hence why I am bringing that forward. Item H is potential sale of laneway, John near King. We have one delegation, KLG. Mr. Ross is available for questions from council, but we'll take the delegation first.
Small item, but it raised a couple of things for me because I just feel it may have consequences down the line that we may regret. This is a laneway behind Sablatine Pastry. And certainly there's a feeling among many that Waterloo is destroying affordable housing and displacing people living there in favor of intensive, expensive high-rise units. And you've probably all seen the series of articles that Bill Jackson's done in the Waterloo Chronicle about this. And I'm aware, and I'm sure you are too, that many municipalities are exploring less destructive and more inclusive forms of intensification, such as laneway development. And I have a friend in Toronto who's been developing these in Toronto. So we don't have many laneways in Waterloo, so when I saw this proposed laneway up for sale, my interest was piqued. And I feel that selling the laneway at this time could close the door on less intensive laneway development on this site. Like I could imagine maybe there could be stacked townhouses separated by a mew developed there. But I feel that once we sell that laneway, it could predispose the owner of who owns all the rest of the lot except for that laneway to apply for demolition of the properties on King Street, like to do the easier development, if you like, and more intensive development. And one of the buildings that I'm concerned with is the building at 203 King Street South. It's a building that's listed on the Heritage Register as a non-designated property of cultural heritage value or interest. Yeah, there's the laneway there. And that building currently houses Sablatine Pastry. It was built in 1855, was the childhood home of Aloysius Bauer, who's the person who founded the Bauer Company, Bauer Lofts, that we remember today. He also managed the Kunst Brewery as the vice president of Globe Furniture, vice president of Ontario Equitable Life and Accident Insurance Company. So it's a very interesting building. And so for these two reasons, but mostly because I feel that it could have consequences down the road. And as far as I can see, there's no pressing need for the city to dispose of this land at this point. So I would just ask you to consider tabling this proposal at this time.
Thank you, Kay. Questions for Kay from members of council? Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there questions for Mr. Ross? Councillor Bonnegar.
Through you, Chair Henry, it's more a general question for staff. I don't know who or if anyone wants to answer this. Just given the proposed development at John and King, I just want to throw the question out there, could it be worth holding onto this pathway in case we want to create a pedestrian corridor, kind of linking what are going to be some sizable developments? Just throwing that out there as a question in case staff have thought about that at all.
Sounds like a Mr. Rapp question, not a lawyer question. I don't want lawyers thinking they're planners. That's a bad place to go. Mr. Rapp?
Thank you. If the picture seems, there we go, that's the good one. It keeps changing back and forth every time I look up. Yep, there it goes again. To my knowledge, the sale of that lane would not impact our ability to create a pedestrian walkway or anything like that. Through site plan, even privately held parcels of land, we have the right through that Planning Act section to secure public access, public laneways, which is what we plan on doing up in Northdale, although there's a report on earlier this afternoon or yet to come forward with about an expropriation. Again, it ties into property behind it where we can secure that type of access through that site plan process. So this would be similar where if any form of redevelopment's occurring in there, and we do have a proposed redevelopment that does block it, but we can secure access through a structure, around a structure, all through site plan. Is it in the exact same location? Probably not. But if there's a need to cross a property, then we can secure it through that process in planning.
And just to go to Ms. Elgey's concern about the heritage or the historic building that's within that broader parcel, I suppose that would just be subject to the same. Like, would our decision on the laneway impact how that historical heritage building would be dealt with?
That could be a legal question. Mr. Ross?
Through you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the heritage matter, yeah, this would be without prejudice to the processes available, the toolkit available to City Council upon proposal to demolish that building that houses Savaltine. And that includes a time frame. If it is designated, it includes a time frame to consider saving the building, etc. More often than not, and I don't want to prejudge the process myself, but more often than not, it results in a quid pro quo discussion with the developer as part of the site plan process, as part of conversations about bonusing, as part of those conversations. And now just to revisit the laneway, to build upon what Mr. Rapp said, if indeed a laneway is secured as part of the site planning process, it's highly unlikely it would look like this, because right now this laneway is not useful as it ends at an ugly fence, and there was no ability to get a laneway from Bauer, or at least at that time no laneway was secured. So I just wanted to add that point. If indeed there may end up being some public realm, I would assume there'll be some public realm asks that staff will have, and ultimately council will have as part of the planning approvals on that. It probably wouldn't look like that.
So just to clarify, Mr. Rapp, you said that there's a proposal has been put forward. I mean, just legally, are we? Can we wait if it's a city? If the proposal is dependent on the release of city land, can we wait to see the proposal before we decide to release the land?
Through Chair Henry to Councillor Bonagor, absolutely. Council can make that decision anytime they want. They can make the decision tonight, or they could choose to wait. I'm not certain of exactly where a proposal sits on either of the neighboring properties, or if it crosses the properties. I do not know that. Until it shows up at our doorstep for pre-consultation, a lot of things are occurring. But I do not know that, honestly, this evening. Other staff might. But that decision is entirely up to council. There's a recommendation, of course, in front of you this evening, but that's entirely up to council.
And final question, can you please just remind us what the zoning is for the neighboring land?
I'm sorry, I do not know that. I wasn't prepared for this line of questioning, sorry.
I should have flagged it with you, I'm sorry.
It would be an uptown zone, I'm not sure of, and probably a 81 because of the height of the neighboring properties and where it is. That would be my educated guess. Sorry.
I'd assume it's U281 based on its location in the uptown. Other questions? Councillor Vasek?
Thanks through you, Chair Henry. I have a few questions. One of the things that Kay mentioned in her presentation was it doesn't seem there's a pressing need. So I'm curious if there's a pressing need that we should know about.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as discussed at a different meeting, this property is part of a potential, it's a study, environmental study that's being done with respect to the lands, adjacent lands, and any remediation would have to occur sort of, all at once with respect to the other lands. Mr. Rapp is correct. You could theoretically forestall this. The only thing I would add is we have been approached to sell this property for as long as I've been here. this is the most credible offer that we've had, and we did indeed go out and obtain an appraisal. And the sale of this land, again, does not prejudge the planning process that any eventual project would have to go through. So a comparable project, for example, across the street, we know that is subject to rigorous planning process as well, whether it would be zoning to tweak the zoning or whatever variances are needed. It's quite likely the built form won't be permitted by the existing zoning on the property, and of course the site plan process and the heritage process. So that's why the recommendation is there. There are sort of some environmental reasons with respect to the site to move this forward. This is the logical purchaser of the property.
So just to follow up to that, so is there a risk to not doing an environmental cleanup if it's not sort of sold at some point? Like I'm just trying to understand the risk of postponing it, even though it makes sense to do it now, like in terms of there being kind of a logical owner and they could maybe do the environmental cleanup altogether. I'm just trying to understand what are the risks of postponing it.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest that as the current owner wants to proceed with the study, the continuation of the studies that have already been completed and the remediation, this is the best point in the process to sell the property. We could get into sort of a chicken and egg issue where potentially we would be, again, I don't want to have to go back in camera, but without oversharing, potentially we could be on the hook with respect to remediation of this laneway if it was not part of what's occurring at the moment right now, whatever that may end up being. So,
yeah. And Mayor Jaworski.
Through the chair. Now, from what I'm looking at, Steve, is this an active laneway, or what goes on in that area?
Through you, Mr. Chair, people do sometimes drive on it to access the back of Sabaltine, but no, there is no pedestrianism on this laneway. Having parked in Sabaltine's parking lot a few times, do we
plow the road though?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't believe so.
Like it just doesn't look like a very active space. It looks like more parking lot than anything.
I'm not aware of us plowing that lane because it doesn't really go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And unless businesses are relying on it specifically for deliveries, we probably wouldn't be interested in plowing it, to be honest.
And then is it the same owner on both sides, the east and west side of the laneway?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
One more question from Councillor Vasek.
Sorry, yes, thanks. My handwriting was messy, so I missed a question I had. Is it a possible spot for affordable units of some sort, or some sort of laneway project that could have a community benefit?
Through Councillor Henry to Councillor Vasek, based on the size of that parcel, it could not be developed on its own, if that's what you're suggesting. That it would rely on a neighboring property, but to get any form of building permit. Because it looks like it's maybe only 20 feet wide, 6 meters wide. So the ability on its own would be zero. It would rely on, if the city was interested in something like that, acquiring lands either to the east or the west to make it a buildable parcel.
Okay. With those questions asked, I will look to see if anybody is interested in moving the recommendation as printed. Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Mayor Jaworski?
Well, I think it's it's certainly an opportunity that has arrived here. I think in terms of laneway, there really isn't even a laneway anymore. It's just paved property. There's no homes backing on it to have special laneway developments like we would have in other areas. And I think with it bisects this piece of land that can be, planned. A lot of the work that we do here is to plan everything as a whole. And so here we have like a unused piece of municipal land that we're going to get $426,000 for. and it allows the development to proceed as a whole. And I think that's a good opportunity here today.
Any other comments on this before I call the vote? All those in favor? All those opposed? All those in favor? That was all of us? Okay. I saw a slow hand. I thought it was opposed. So it's everybody in favor. Okay, happy to talk to you afterwards about my thoughts. I'm moving on in the interest of time. Are there any questions over item I? Are there questions on item I? Seeing none, do I see a mover for item I? Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Veith. All those in favor? Carried. Are there questions on item J? Yes or no? No? Yes? Then I'm deferring item J. Item K we've dealt with. Item L, there is a presentation which we can ignore if we'd like, or we can skip to the evening. It's the consultant. We like Northdale, everything's good. All those in favor of those? Any concerns from staff with just approving? For item L? Any concerns, Mark? I'll take a mover. Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? Funding release, yep. I can tell everybody why I like that later. Images would be great. Hopefully they can be shared. Any questions on item M? Yes, deferred. Any questions on item N? Deferred. Any questions? We'll have a presentation. I will defer O because that's substantial. And that takes us to the notice of motion for whom we have delegates. I will let council know that at 5:30 we have a standing order to defer for dinner until 6:30. I will look at that time for a motion to extend and delay dinner. But we will take delegations at this time. Who is that?
Hello, yes. My name is Louisette Lontagne. I'm from 700 Starflower Avenue in Waterloo. And I was listening to the rest of the meeting. I wasn't coming in scripted at all. I was just going to show this. But I want to talk for a moment about asset risk management because I have a friend of mine who manages $106 trillion worth of assets. I met him several years ago, and he gave me documentation which I forwarded to the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, as well as Revenue Canada, and several other regulators. The Alberta Energy Regulator refused to investigate the concerns, but it was picked up by the Ontario Securities and Exchange Commission, which is how it got to the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. Canada has a 20% risk exposure to tar sands when 5% was recommended. So we're in deep doo-doo. I'm sorry, I never thought I'd say that. It was unscripted, but I'm going to go into the rest of this because our forecasts were based on past performance without regard to current and emerging risks. There's been lack of fiscal and judicial prudence with regulations pertaining to pipelines. Currently, we're seeing liability risk where parent companies are not contractually obligated to the conditions and terms of subsidiary companies, and that applies to Enbridge Line 5, owned by an Enbridge subsidiary. Enbridge Pipeline Incorporated is not liable contractually. So this has gone to court through the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, and there are 3 attorney generals who agree with the concern, including one from California, Wisconsin, Minnesota. So I want to put that out there because there is a portion of our revenues which comes from a revenue stream associated with the company involved, and that whole culture is going to change. We're running out of Dutch sandwiches to serve to people, and things are on the switching lane right now. Alberta, if you review, there's a lot of issues with the Integrity Commissioner's reports coming out. There's a blue ribbon report. There's been gross mismanagement of funds and a culture that's toxic with the Alberta Energy Regulator. So don't expect anything that can be expected, but please foster resilience in your planning, diversify your risk. That is the advice I bring to the table today. And with that being said, I believe that the fiscal risks are going to hit us just as hard as climate risk. You're going to have to do a lot of to keep us afloat. And here's my presentation. If you could begin it, I'd appreciate it. Well, yep. Thank you. So, from what I have witnessed and what I have observed, we have an educated, compassionate, social cohesion of a movement that has brought everybody from all walks of life and all ages and all cultures together to say we need to do something now. I don't trust engineers. I am the daughter of an engineer, a good one, and I've seen too many bad ones. Because the rubber stamp, when handed over to a company, is no longer their liability. And I have seen horrific fiscal decisions made with a lack of regard to fiscal and judicial prudence. And I am not done with the observation of this, and the Netherlands don't want to be the place to hide anymore. And that was according to their secretary. We are gaining leverage at the very root of the finance. And this is about tax evasion, it's about fraud, it's about climate fraud, and it's about austerity, and a culture that has gripped our nation in a decision process that binds us to bad choices from 10 to 50 years because of the way the structure is. So we need to be creative, we need to have courage, and think outside the box on how we approach this. We need to work as a team. But my hope today is to encourage you to diversify your risk, manage your assets well, listen to your people, and use the strength of those numbers to help you in doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louisette. Any questions? Thank you very much. Next up, we have Kai Raymer Watts. Kai, please come forward.
I just want to start by saying thank you to Lisette for sharing that. I mean, it's just, I think, the perfect way to start this, and just this reminder of how long this work has been going on, and people in this community have been working to really drive dramatic leadership. By way of introduction, my name is Kai. I am one of the members of a team that's been bringing these motions forward across the region. Normally up here with my colleague Andreas Fuentes. He couldn't be here tonight, but he'll be in Cambridge tomorrow. And I want to say first and foremost that this is one of the more comprehensive motions that have been brought forward at a city level, so we were impressed with that. And I'd like to think that this movement locally has played no small part in that, at really driving the ambition that's needed. And there's still work to be done, much work. So the climate's in a state of emergency. I feel like I'm kind of stating the obvious by saying this, but every day now we look at the headlines, see ever-increasing impacts of climate change on our world, globally, locally, and it's destroying a world that we love. It's heartbreaking. It's actually heartbreaking to see, much less to actually live through for those who have to live through any of these disasters. And they're accelerating. The United Nations now estimates climate disasters are occurring at a rate of 1 per week and a cost of over $520 billion per year. This is one of the big reasons why wealthy countries like ours need to step up in funding loss and damage, which will be debated at the upcoming COP Conference of the Party Agreements. We need to take responsibility for our contributions to this and make sure that countries have the resources, at least somewhere close to the resources that they need to respond. And many of these costs are being borne by frontline communities and municipalities, and that's going to increase. So This is a chart from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Special Report on the impacts of 1.5 degrees C warming released this last fall. It's looking from 1876, showing the cumulative CO2 rise and surface temperature rise. And we've already locked into about 1 degree of warming. We're speeding towards 1.5. Which is the threshold we're meant to stay below. Depending on which pathway you choose, we'll arrive there somewhere between 2020 and 2030. And one of the reasons this was baked into the Paris Agreement is because passing this threshold means much more severe and accelerating impacts. The climate system is nonlinear. And so, we're already in very dangerous territory. We're going to be getting into increasingly dangerous territory if we push this system further. So as Lisette so beautifully described, millions of people have been speaking up worldwide. And people are ahead of the politics on this. There were over 7 million people around the world that striked last September, over 1 million here in Canada for climate justice and to treat this situation as the emergency that we know it is. It's a threat to our futures. We need to be incredibly honest about that. We've never had such a turnout as we had at Waterloo Square this last September, and that's a movement that is continuing to build. And I just want to say all of my respect to all of the people who continue to come out. There's another strike this coming November 29th, and I really hope many of those in this room, including council, will be there because really it's we're all in this together. It's all of our futures that are on the line here. So the Climate Emergency Declaration is part of a growing international movement. Cities, regions, even countries that have made these pledges. Clearly, we don't want to make a pledge like our federal government has and then go and buy a pipeline the next day. So it's important that these pledges are followed through with substantive action. And I was happy to see some of that in the directives to staff that are laid out in this. It's covering over 300 million citizens. I think that number is now dated. So why declare a climate emergency? Again, feels like stating the obvious, but we need to call this what it is. There's some evidence that suggests that climate change as a term was even crafted in partnership with the fossil fuel industry to make it sound soft and non-threatening. That's never been what this is. I did a master's in climate change. I wish they'd called it a master's in climate breakdown. Because that's actually what we're dealing with. It's a serious issue. And for years we've let our emissions get away from us, much like a runaway train. The small efforts that we've been applying to try and slow us down have been very inadequate. So this lack of necessary action has put us in a position where we're now running out of track and we need to pull the emergency brake. We need to pull that today, and that's really what this motion signifies. This is completely in our own self-interest. As has been laid out clearly, we're going to be seeing increasing local climate impacts, and that brings costs at a municipal level. It brings costs to our citizens, their well-being and financial. And so it's, the best thing that we can do is step up. Now, included in this agreement, or this motion, I should say, is the idea of going beyond rhetoric and moving into strong accountability. And so that's why I'm happy to see that this proposal also includes the idea of a carbon budget. which would basically treat emissions as we treat money in the budget process. That just like everything the region does has a financial cost, it also has an emissions cost. And that really needs to be measured and accounted for in order to begin reducing it. This is something we should have begun a long time ago. And so by introducing this as a budget, it means people in different departments can start realizing the emissions costs of these daily activities. And it empowers staff who really know their department better than anyone to help find efficiencies. On the other end, it also means council has to ensure the operations of the corporation comply with the emissions that were budgeted for that year. So just as if there's no money, you can't build it or operate it. If there's no emissions, you also can't do it. Or you have to find a more efficient way to do it, which staff can help with. And it adds measurable value to things that may not have had an assigned value in the past, which is, I think, really important. Things like greening our infrastructure. You know, we talk in these meetings a lot about more development. We also need to be bringing in into that conversation, how do we assign value to our green infrastructure, our trees, which help with stormwater and pollution, and more efficient buildings. So a carbon budget would start to actually give a tangible value to those things. It is a growing movement. So, you know, this is following on a whole suite of declarations across this region, and I think really the hope here is that municipalities will work closely together. I know Sustainable Waterloo Region has been closely involved as well to make sure that these declarations that are being put forward, these commitments, the time investment from staff is coordinated in the most efficient way possible while driving as much ambition as possible. So I think we're in a unique position in this region to be able to do that and to be able to really collaborate and break out of our silos on that. So this is just a quick video. With a minute remaining, I want to really emphasize this. So we have a need for systems change. That is completely clear from everything that the science and the reality that we're in is kind of shouting at us. And I think many of the folks in this room would agree, you know, we want to help support those changes that are necessary. We want to bring community along to make sure that nobody gets left behind in this process. I was really appreciative of an emphasis on justice within this motion of looking to our Indigenous communities and all of the leadership that has existed here for thousands of years to learn from in this, and to making sure that those who are already on the front lines of climate impacts in our communities, you know, the homeless who are dealing with this on a daily basis, farmers in our broader region as well, are looked out for and taken care of through this transition. We really need to care for each other through it as we're trying to be as ambitious as possible. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kai. Are there any questions for Kai? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. Before I go to Laura Hamilton, I need a motion to extend the afternoon session until the end of this item, moved by Councillor Vasic, seconded by Councillor Bonagor. All those in favor? Carried. Laura?
Quick final notice, she's coming up. We're going to need to up our targets. I could see that being suggested in here.
Thanks. And keep this slide for a sec before we get to mine. because I think that's wonderful. Plus, we're missing that banner. We lost it, and it's one of my favorite banners. So thank you, Councillor Henry and Mayor Jaworski and members of the committee and staff and for letting us all speak here today. I'm here as a member of Divest Waterloo. We're a local chapter of Faith in the Common Good, a national interfaith network that's dedicated toward or to protecting our ecosystem. And like Kai, I've been working to bring these motions forward to municipalities across the region. In fact, it was Chris Boyle, a councillor in Vancouver, who's also a United Church minister and led the Vancouver chapter of Faith in the Common Good for many years, who brought the first climate emergency motion forward in a municipality in Canada. So over the last 5 years, Divest Waterloo has organized close to 50 events in our region to create awareness about climate change and climate justice and to grow the political will for action commensurate with the scale of this crisis. And so, as you can imagine, I'm very happy to be here today as you consider this motion. So, the slides, yeah. This is, I guess, what we've looked like for the last 30 years and hopefully what we won't look like going forward. Does this move the slides here?
You've got a keyboard and a mouse, so it's
beautiful.
There
Thank you. And here's where we find ourselves. And so just to talk about the warming for a bit, this is a recent measure of CO2 in the atmosphere at Mauna Loa in Hawaii. This level of 415 parts per million has not been seen in over 3 million years. So to put this in context, this shows the average level over the past 10,000 years. We think of this period as recorded history or the Holocene. Some people think the Garden of Eden factors in here. It's basically the age of what we call civilization. And this is the age of agriculture and cities. And as you can see, we're in an anomalous period. Our civilization depends on agriculture, and agriculture depends on a stable climate. And for perspective, this is the level of CO2 over the past 800,000 years, which is to say that we have never been in this place before. We have never experienced this before. And finally, this one shows that Canada is warming twice as fast as the global average and that some parts of Canada are warming even faster. The events of the last year have made it clear that climate change is happening sooner, it's happening quicker, and the events or the impacts are more severe than have been predicted. The IPCC recently told us that to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we have about 10 years to change the way we do just about everything. And really, we only have 2 years to dramatically change our emission trajectory in order to make it possible to do what we need to do in the time that we have left to do it. So we understand the science, and we know where we're heading, and we know that Canada is nowhere near achieving our Paris commitments. According to an organization called Climate Transparency, they released their annual report just last Monday. Canada's plan to meet its greenhouse gas emission targets is among the worst in the G20, and Canada, along with South Korea and Australia, is among the 3 worst G20 countries in achieving our already embarrassingly low targets. In 2009, all nations agreed that 2 degrees is the threshold we must not cross. At 2 degrees, the odds change against us and in favor of tipping points. They're also called feedback loops, and they're also called something referred to as unstoppable climate change. And so that is why 2 degrees is what we have to work to avoid. The UN has also confirmed that globally we are on track to significantly overshoot the 2-degree target. Globally, we're on a path of 4 to 6 degrees of warming by the end of this century. And in their now famous 2009 report on climate change, the US military states that between 4 and 6 degrees, their work is done. They say that at that point, there will be no civil society to protect. So this is not simply about how we protect the environment or how we adapt to extreme weather or local weather events. It's about the very real threat of system collapse. So why a municipal declaration? Well, it's because cities are responsible for over 70% of global emissions, and cities have taken the lead when higher levels of government have failed to act. And why Waterloo? Well, that's because we're asking all municipalities in our region to declare a climate emergency and to work together to strengthen our collective ambition and accountability with respect to climate action. So thank you for your good work, the good work that you've done with your Sustainability Advisory Committee and the good work that they continue to do, and for your corporate climate change adaptation plan, the Conservation Demand Management Program, your green building policy, your work with Climate Action Waterloo Region, and your commitment to the sustainability development goals, and the fact that you're committing, as Kai mentioned, so importantly, to do this work alongside, and dare I say you should do it in solidarity with the first and original peoples of this land, and also to care for those most vulnerable and those who are feeling the impacts first. This isn't about our children and future generations. There are people now every day dying because of climate change, and they really don't look a lot like us. So these things that you're doing, they're all a really good start, but now that the science is clear, we really have to increase our ambition. You need to go beyond the minimum target in this motion that's being considered today, and you need to align our municipal targets with evidence and with IPCC thresholds. We need a place-based response. This is our home, and this is where we all respond to the climate crisis. I loved Lulu's video. Thank you. There were so many memories in there of things that we've all done together, and this is where we live, and this is where we respond to the climate crisis. Thank you. We are looking to you for leadership to acknowledge the truth. Kai's points about the term climate change, it's not truthful at all. And we need you to act accordingly, and we need you to lead us in action. We need a municipal carbon budget for transparency and accountability to support increased ambition. A carbon budget takes climate action out of the silo and embeds it in every municipal action. To declare a climate emergency and not demonstrate your commitment by establishing a carbon budget risks increasing cynicism and public apathy, something that we simply cannot afford in the midst of a global crisis. Our community is internationally recognized for our innovation and our commitment to social justice. Because of this, we are well positioned to be a global climate leader. So I'm asking you to land on the right side of history by supporting this motion and to declare a climate emergency and to establish a carbon budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Are there any questions for Ms. Hamilton? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next up, we have KL. Next and last, and then we'll go to council.
Well, I emailed you earlier in the day, so in the interest of getting you to have some dinner, I won't reread all I said. I really applaud Councillor Bunagore for bringing forward this resolution, and I hope you will all support it. If I thought that right now, with our stomachs growling, we could possibly cobble together a stronger resolution, I'd ask you to do that. But I'm happy to start with this. And I want, as a citizen of Waterloo, to look to this city to provide leadership on this. I think that you've seen there's a lot of great people in the audience. I think we could develop some prevention and mitigation and adaptation measures. Definitely, I'd love to see a carbon budget as part of the 2020 municipal budget. And the thing that really brought the threat of it home to me, and this is such a small thing, I hate to mention but I went on Graham Whiting's walk that he did on Doors Open Day along the flood zone in Uptown, and I urge you to all do that because it really brings it home. It's one thing to see it on a map, but it's another to walk it and realize how much flooding could affect us. We read about it in Venice. We're not immune here, and we're certainly not immune when we look at those grants. So I just encourage you to accept this motion, and let's see something moving forward really quickly on this in the new year.
Thank you, Kay. Seeing no questions for Kay, I'll turn to Councillor Bunagore. If you would like to read it out, you can, but everybody has it. I would be happy for you to move it, for someone to second it. Councillor Bodley will second it, and then you and then others can speak to it.
Thank you, Chair Henry. And I would like to thank everyone for coming today, for speaking with us, for sharing your stories, and for having done so for years now. With this motion, I want you to know that we share your concern, we hear you, and hopefully, if the motion passes, we're going to act. This is without doubt the most pressing issue of our times. Climate breakdown threatens our city environment, social cohesion, financial sustainability, and more. Earlier this evening, we were talking about the energy conservation and demand management plan. It's in our packet. It shows exactly how this kind of motion can have an impact and can make a difference. That plan includes the line, that this sets an aggressive target in response to a climate emergency and will require a fundamental shift in the city's long-term planning. Having that statement in a city report is exactly why I think we need a motion like this, because staff get it as well. That's one thing I want residents to know. Staff know this is urgent. Residents know this is urgent. We heard earlier tonight the asset management feedback. Residents there were telling us that environment is a priority and that it's urgent. The need to invest in a greener future for all of us, it comes up again and again. This motion, it's not about just a statement. It's not posturing. It's not virtue signaling. This is leadership. With this motion, we are stating publicly and clearly where our priorities are and that we are willing to take action on them. It will force us to rethink everything we do, and that's going to be hard. I don't pretend that it's not. It's going to be hard, and it will cost us money. But not doing it will lead to something much harder and much more costly. So I do hope that you support the motion.
Thank you. Other commenters on this? Councillor Bodley?
Excuse me. Through you, Chair Henry. So I just want to talk about a few things, I guess, around the motion. One, I think we don't do a good enough job sometimes of celebrating the successes that we've had in the region. So I want to use this opportunity to talk about some of the regional initiatives that have been really beneficial for us. Things like the Countryside Line Initiative, things like the LRT, and what the City of Waterloo's role in supporting those initiatives has been to help us protect farmland, to help us protect the rural and urban mix that we have here, growing up that you see that we're doing, not out, limiting urban sprawl. We need to pat ourselves on the back for some of these things. Other city initiatives that have been referenced earlier, the Energy Conservation Demand Management Program, that if anybody after the long afternoon session wants to stick around and learn more about, they can. The Green Building Policy, even just the impact that the Green Building Policy has had on the WMRC project. The work that the city's done with Climate Action Waterloo Region. These are all great things that we need to do a better job of trumpeting. And so when we look at this motion or this declaration, I don't see it as an indictment necessarily of our progress. I see it as an acknowledgement that the objectives that we need to hit are within reach, they are achievable, but they are challenging, as Councillor Bonagor said, and that there is work to be done. We signaled this in the City of Waterloo strategic plan by declaring or talking about the climate emergency as a crisis. We've asked staff to connect it to business plans. We've asked staff to look into establishing metrics to review this. And so I guess what it comes back to is why? Why should we support this motion that's wonderfully crafted by Councillor Bonagor here? And for me, it comes down to four things. The first thing is simply honesty. We are naming, framing, and deepening the intention to solve this problem. The second thing for me is around leadership. We are signaling it as a priority to encourage residents, to encourage our business community and the nonprofits in our within our region to continue the great work that they are doing and to support that work whenever we can. The third thing is around embedding this, and we talked about this a lot during our strategic planning discussions as well too, making sure that this work is embedded in everything we do at the city, that it's not just buildings and fleet, that we're talking about transportation, we're talking about planning, we're talking about community services, and everybody within the city that has a role to play in this regard. And the fourth thing for me is around capacity, which is specifically referenced in the motion, but making sure that staff in the City of Waterloo have not just the time and the person power to be able to work on this, but also the knowledge and the desire to act on these problems. So those are the reasons why I see this as being important. And there's a quote that I heard recently that has really resonated with me, and it is that when it comes to environmental issues, unfortunately, all success is temporary and all failure is permanent. And it just resonates with me because despite of all the hard work that we've done and all the hard work that we have yet to do, we need to continue to remain vigilant. And for me, we need to continue to codify this language for future leaders of the city of Waterloo. And so as such, I will be supporting, and I hope that this formal acknowledgement with specific actions that the city will work towards is not just a declaration, but a statement of hope that there are solutions and that the city of Waterloo is going to do our part. Thank you.
And I have Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. I certainly will be supporting, and I just wanted to thank counselors because we all sit here as peers, and sometimes it takes somebody to have the leadership like Councillor Bonagor, and I know the rest of you want to participate in this as well, and to thank the staff who participated in helping shape this so that it was something that's workable, doable, and more meaningful, because I know that was something that weighed on council's mind, that we were going to be declaring a climate emergency and then turn the page to something else. And so to work and then get this written in a way that's sort of a big step forward, as Councillor Bodley mentioned, and to go from there. So I just want to thank council and staff for their work on this.
Councillor Veith and Councillor Freeman.
Through your Chair, Henry, thank you for this. And thank you to the presenters today, and also to our staff, because I was, of course, pretty worried about when this came forward, but because it has a lot of implications that it's going to be hard for some community members, but for me, if this is a way that we can eliminate the leaf collection program, so I'm very happy to support it. So thank you.
And Councillor Freeman.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank you as well for coming. Like Councillor Veith, I sat down with a lot of different staff members because I wanted to get a sense of how it was that they interpreted what they saw within this motion, and what that looked like to their everyday workload and so on. I mean, one of the pieces for me that was very impactful and was to actually finally see like a real effort on behalf of the community to come forward to the public square to say this really matters, because this council has spent 10 years working on really thinking differently about our transportation systems, and if I shared even a quarter of the nasty grams that I've received every time we put a bike lane down on a road, you'd be shocked. And so for me, like, first off, I'm very thankful that this council is very unified in terms of this being important to them. It doesn't always happen that you have a council that's very unified on this future vision. And when there is division, then that helps to fuel division more broadly within the community. So, I will be supporting this motion. And I'm also putting it out to the community. You told us this was important to you. You told us it was important in the public square. You've told us it's important to you in your comments on our infrastructure report card. You've told us that it's important that you have choices on how you can get from where you live to where you work that doesn't involve turning over a gasoline engine or even parking a car in the uptown. And so if these things are truly important to you, then we need your help too. And I don't want this city to start planning for autonomous vehicles. It should be planning a city for people. And that we have to stay true to that vision. And so when development applications come, I hope that everyone who believes in what we're saying today comes and says, yes, it's okay to not have extra parking. Please approve this. It's okay for me to share some of the space on the road in front of my house for a bicycle. I don't need to park my fourth car there. So these are really important pieces that we need the community to stand up with us for. And I agree with Councillor Veith. The idle emissions associated with collection of leaves, the emissions related to the methane gas produced when they compost in our landfill sites, the other negative greenhouse gas emissions fueled by our heavy equipment having to now use front-end loaders plus dump trucks to get rid of these leaves. It's ridiculous. It can be done. I mulched a 60-foot maple into my front yard, and I mulched 10 60-foot maples in my backyard and composted the rest. So it can be done, and we need to make it a priority.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Seeing none, before I take the vote, I'll simply say that a lot is being said around the table that was in my head. Councillor Freeman's notes especially. One of the most important parts of this motion is it's not, as the mayor said, declaring an emergency and turning the page. But as Councillor Freeman's highlighted, we're not turning the page, and it's important the community doesn't either. On those items that implement these bold declarations, we need your help. Because a leader running a race with nobody behind them is just somebody out for a walk. And we need to have the whole community remain behind, councils that are exercising that leadership so that they can continue to exercise that leadership and get us where we need to go together. And I think that's one of the most important parts of this process, is how it's been for a number of years, a few people in a few places saying the same thing. Lulu, you've got friends today. And there are so many people that have come together over and around these issues, and we'll need so many more to get it done. So keep doing what you're doing, all of you, and we'll take our cues, and we'll make sure that we can do our part. So with that, I'll take the vote. All of those in favor? That's all of us. And I'll let the chair record it. So as I note that we stand adjourned until 6:30, we'll begin going back to item 6F at 6:30. We should be expeditious. There will be more people in here waiting for their item that they think is on at 6:30.